be live here. Second. Live any second now.
Oh, nice.
Video takes. We're ready to go.
Oh, wow. Is it time for the liveness?
It is the thing. Yeah, now's the time.
All right. Welcome to the Critical Christian Podcast. We're your hosts, Dan
and Justin. We ask critical questions about the Bible and provide questionable answers. Although, I think we should give ourselves a little bit of credit. We've come up with some pretty good answers.
Yeah, these aren't no questionable answers. These are some good ones.
I agree with that, actually. Well, this week we are in a juicy chapter.
Pretty juicy.
Exodus chapter 20. And we're in the first portion of what's usually referred to as the covenant code, which are we would say the earliest laws given to Moses. And we would say probably one of the earliest parts of the book of Exodus even. So there's some interesting stuff in here, and I think we're gonna cover some of these commandments and maybe say some things that people haven't heard before. I know people think the 10 Commandments have been covered so often, but believe it or not, there's some little nuggets kind of hidden in this chapter that you probably didn't hear in church or Sunday school or Catholic school.
There's a lot of nuggets.
There's definitely some nuggets.
No, a lot of them.
So I think I'm excited about you.
Look at all that.
Yeah, lots of notes. I know.
Lots
I saw that.
of notes, yeah.
Well, with that then, let's go ahead and kick it off, Dan. Can you read our first 3 verses and then jump right into your note?
Let's do it. Then God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. That's number 1.
That's a good one.
That's number 1, baby. So do you think this means they can have other gods? They just have to always prioritize God's absolute authority? What? That's a good question.
No, that's a fair question, because in the English wording that we have, when it says the word before, it kind of feels as though it's saying in a position. Like there's a first place or a second place or a third place God. And he's just saying, make sure that I am, the God that comes first.
So that's what I just said.
Sure. I get that. But I'm not entirely sure that is the meaning of the text here. In fact, I can probably, give me a second. I'll grab the Hebrew text. In fact, I can just pull it up because we got the...
All right, you do that, and I'll tell you why you're wrong.
Well, what I'm saying is we've got the Hebrew text. Since we have the web browser on our live cast now, I can actually pull it up in a way that everyone can see it.
All right.
So let me grab... we're going to do Exodus 20, and we'll do an interlinear text, and we wanted 3. And... Bible Hub is a good go-to for this, but I actually like the Blue Letter Bible layout a little bit better. And we're not going to do the King James. We'll do the Hebrew to the NASB 95. And so this is the word I was expecting to see, Pene, which basically means the face of something. And so this is the word that we get a lot in the Bible when God is using a position, like he said it before me. That basically means literally in front of my face.
No, it doesn't. Listen, can you say it in what it actually means, like English words?
Well, what I'm saying is, in the Hebrew idiom, when it uses the word face to refer to,
there's no face on this.
That's what I'm saying. The word Pene,
yes,
refers to face in Hebrew. Follow so far?
Nope.
Okay. The word Pene in Hebrew typically means face, a face, somebody's face.
Okay.
But it is also used idiomatically to mean a preposition, like in front of me. Like if I said it's in your face, no one thinks that it's literally in your face. It is in front of you.
Okay.
And that's how this word gets used a lot in the Bible. When it refers to God's face, a lot of times it means in his presence or before him.
So don't have any other gods in front of me.
Right.
Put them so I can't see them.
Right.
Wait, what?
No.
Oh.
Well, so we've got a really interesting preposition before panem. And what it means is like upon, on, or against. Now in the interlinear translation here, they did a really weird thing. They translated it as before me. That's not really what that means. That's not really how those words work. But that's what he's saying is no other gods before my face, or don't let me see any other gods. Essentially what he's saying.
So what he's saying is other gods exist, but don't be worshiping them.
Well, I don't know here if he is saying that other gods do exist. He's just saying that there shall be no other gods, before me. That he's saying, I don't want to see any other gods. Like if your mother was like, Dan, I do not want to see any of clothes on your floor when I get back here. What are you saying? There shall be no other gods in front of my face. I don't want to see any of these things.
So God's like, please pick up your idols and put them.
Essentially, yes. It's an idiomatic phrase that God is using, or at least that the text is using, to suggest that I don't want to see any other idols, any other gods. I don't want to see them. I don't want them before my face. I don't want to see them. Get them out of my sight.
Okay.
That's like when people in the Bible are dismissed, like by a king or by somebody else, they'll say, remove them from my face. That makes sense. So it's not to say that, their face really has anything to do with it. The face is an idiomatic expression for, the visual sight, or sometimes just the presence of somebody.
Okay.
So and this is just how I read it. When I'm reading this, I'm reading it to idiomatically mean God saying, I don't want to see any of your other gods. They shouldn't exist. Get them out of here.
I don't want to see any of your other gods. They exist, but let's pretend they don't. Is that what you're saying? I mean, because if you want to go on this route, I have some nice proof that there are other gods in the Bible.
I mean, we've already examined.
We can't examine it too much, though. I mean, we can't examine it too much. It can't be examined too much. That made sense.
Let me read a note here from a study Bible that I think sums up what I'm saying about the Hebrew expression here.
Yes.
It says the Hebrew phrase underlying the translation, beside me, which is what they have in this translation, is nonetheless problematic and has seen variously translated as except me, in addition to me, in preference to me, in defiance of me, in front of me, or literally before my face. The latter translation, with its concrete spatial nuance, has suggested to some that the prohibition once sought to exclude from the Lord's sanctuary the cult images or idols of other gods, such as the Asherah, or stylized sacred trees of life associated with the Canaanite goddess Asherah over the course of time. And this is exactly actually how I read it. I'm reading God as saying, I do not want any of your idols or your gods anywhere near me in my presence. I don't want to see them. They have no place.
Okay. But he's not saying they don't exist.
Well, it depends on what you mean by gods here.
What do we mean?
Because the biblical authors typically understood foreign gods as being just like wooden or metal cultic objects.
Incorrect. If you go to Deuteronomy 32:8-9, it mentions he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God.
Right.
Sons of God. You know what that's talking about, right?
The angels?
The angels.
Right, but that's different, though. The sons of God in the biblical text are different than we would say, like the competitive gods, like Marduk or Baal.
I mean, it
Melkart.
seems odd that God would be concerned with literal idols, made of gold or whatever.
But he is. Almost every book of the Bible mentions them. Almost literally every king of the Book of Kings that was described as being a good king was good because he went and he cut down the wooden idols of the Baal or the Asherim.
Now, why does it matter if people are worshiping idols?
I mean,
why does that matter? Why is that bad?
Well, because God wants all the worship.
Yeah, but they're not worshiping anybody. So even if you're just worshiping nothing at all.
So that's actually a really good point because Paul addresses this. Remember in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, he's posed with the question on whether or not they can eat the meat in the public marketplace because it's been sacrificed to idols. And Paul says, well, because we know that there is actually only one God and that there is no such thing as an idol, they don't really exist. Then yeah, you can eat the meat sacrificed to the idols because they're sacrificed to nothing, basically.
That makes sense.
So Paul has that understanding of like, hey, listen, these guys don't actually exist. So yeah, I mean, it's fine. But the rest of the Bible seems to disagree with that. And the Old Testament seems to be of the opinion in the earliest portions of the Bible that there was more or less a whole divine realm of deities.
Yeah, like if you were worshiping an idol, you're worshiping the actual real God.
Right.
Right? Like this Baal person or whatever, Yeah.
Yeah, the hard part is knowing what portion or what time period we're in, because, for example, in the earliest strata of the Bible, it definitely sounds polytheistic, right? In the later biblical strands, it's more monotheistic because they moved from a polytheistic worldview to a monotheistic worldview. And one of the hard things when we're looking at Exodus here is knowing, was this written in a monotheistic framework or a polytheistic framework? And I don't really know because we don't really know when this was written. And while it was probably written early, probably pre-exile, it's hard to know if they had in mind multiple deities. But if we say that this was pretty early, like say even as early as King David when it was written down,
okay,
we would definitely interpret it probably the way that you're interpreting it, which is that God is not suggesting that there are no other gods. He's just suggesting that you shall abandon them and put me first. Unfortunately, when you read the later texts of the Bible, or really any of the texts of the Bible, God's upset if you worship any of the other gods at all, even if he is put first. He wants to be the only God.
No, I mean, I get that.
Right.
I don't know. I think there's an argument to be made that there are other gods.
Fair enough.
Not above him. I mean, he actually made them all.
Sure.
All right, let's go.
I don't disagree with you. So far, what we've read in the book of Exodus would lead us to believe that there are many gods.
And especially Genesis, even though I know that's kind of cheating to use Genesis for anything at all.
And we saw in Exodus, God himself says that he's bringing judgment on the gods of Egypt.
Yeah, what does that mean, right? Bam.
It certainly sounds like God is saying that, like, I'm more powerful than their gods. Watch me take them out.
Yeah, instead of I'm more powerful than nothing, because there's nothing there.
Right. Why would he be bringing judgment on the gods of Egypt if they didn't exist?
Right.
I'm with you on that one. Well, I do agree with you. If we can date this text as an early text, I think it would make a lot of sense to suggest that this is still polytheistic.
All right. We did it.
All right, let's move on to verse 4. This is technically commandment number 2.
Commandment number 2. You shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth.
Right.
So these 3 verses are for the second commandment, which, if I'm not mistaken, is generally summed up as don't make any graven images, right?
That's a lot of times what you hear, yeah.
It's interesting that it mentions in the water underneath the earth. I don't know if I've ever heard that before. I wonder if that's just because God wanted to make it abundantly clear not to make any images or what have you, or if there's something I'm missing and you're going to tell me about like Atlantis or something.
I don't know for sure if you're in reading that correctly. So when I read it, it says, "You shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven or above the earth or in the water under the earth."
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he's saying that you would make something in the water.
Okay.
He's saying that you wouldn't make an idol that represented anything that was in the water.
Why would people do that anyhow?
Because they had water deities.
Oh, is that really what it's about?
Never heard of Typhoon?
Sure, whatever.
A Greek deity?
Maybe.
Oh, or Tiamat, the Sumerian Babylonian deity
Yeah.
of the water? Or the counterpart to that in Ugaritic would be like Lothin. But there's a bunch of like, or Tehom. Tehom is a cognate of a water deity in the Semitic languages.
And then the one that's a whirlpool. I forget her name. It's like
Calypso too.
There we go.
The Greeks had Calypso.
Yeah.
Although she didn't necessarily always dwell on in the water.
Mm-hmm.
Calypso, because in fact, remember the Iliad and the Odyssey?
Of course, by heart.
In the Odyssey, at the beginning of it, we learn that Calypso is holding somebody on an island like captive.
Okay.
So she must have been able to dwell on land as well as the water, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was another god maybe I'm thinking of too.
Probably. There's a lot of water gods.
Yeah, there's that TV show called something, and it
very helpful.
And it mentions stuff like that. It's a cartoon set in like the Greek old.
I
don't ask me these questions.
Nevertheless, I'm reading this commandment as something really interesting.
Yes.
It says, "You shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the water." So it sounds to me like God is. Here's what I don't know yet. Okay. Yes. It sounds to me like God is suggesting an idol of anything, but it's not clear if he means an idol of anything except for me. Right? Because if he said, "You shall not make an idol of anything in heaven or on earth," then you would say, oh, well, those are technically, both of those are like domains where God is present a lot. Like he's on the mountains, he's in the camp of Israel, he's just above the firmament, he's in the Hashemayim, the heavens. So then that would seem like he's saying, listen, don't make an idol of me.
Well, I would have to look up what the word idol actually means, which is what I'm doing right now.
Typically an image.
So it says it's worshipped as a god or as embodying a deity. So obviously, I would assume what God is saying is you can make, images of, no, maybe you know what I mean, as long as you realize that's not where I live or something. You know what I mean?
I don't. So
that's too bad.
What I'm reading here,
the
way I'm interpreting this is that he's suggesting don't make idols of anything, even of me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can't though, since we don't know what God looks like, right?
Well, kind of, because Genesis says that humans were made in the image of God.
Okay.
In the same way, Genesis chapter 5 says that Adam had children in the image of Adam, meaning they had the physical likeness, right? And every way that God is described, he has human-like characteristics. He has a face, he has hands, arms, legs, feet. He can smell.
Yeah, but I mean, you've never seen an idol of God. It's always Jesus.
Well, yeah, obviously. An idol of God would look like a human.
Yeah, but nobody would know it was God. You'd have to put under it, by the way, this is God.
Well, they would.
Okay.
Because you would put it in God's temple or tabernacle.
Oh.
Obviously, they're going to know who it is.
All right, fine.
You're not going to put a statue of Baal in Yahweh's temple.
Well, no, I wouldn't think so.
Right. But interestingly enough, in Jerusalem,
Yes.
there have been ancient temples and shrines dug up in Jerusalem that had idols in them.
Of God?
Yeah.
Of God?
Well, obviously, yes.
Well, it says not to do that, so.
I'm aware, yes. I know it says not to do it because people were doing it.
What's wrong with making an idol of God?
See if we can find the...
Right?
What's that?
What's wrong with making an idol of God?
Well, he doesn't want you to.
I know, but why not?
Here we go. Here's a standing stone. So here's a standing stone inside of a sanctuary, and we found, what archaeologists have found, in various temples that were in Jerusalem from roughly the time of King Solomon, that there were temples and shrines that had 2 standing stones. Here's one right here.
Mm-hmm.
But they had some that had 2 standing stones in the holy area of the temple.
Mm-hmm.
And usually why that is because they believed that the god had like a consort, like Yahweh would have a wife, basically.
Oh.
So there's a male and a female deity. That's typically why you always had 2 standing stones. Because in the ancient practice, almost all deities, you had one male, one female supreme deity.
Oh. Ah.
Because that's how they gave birth to the other gods.
Oh.
And the other gods were responsible for keeping everything in order, for the sun and the moon and the... Right?
Yeah.
So I'm reading this as God saying that I don't want you making an image of anything, even of me.
Yeah. I just can't figure out why he would care.
Well, because he doesn't want you worshiping a stone.
Yeah, but nobody. I mean, I doubt anybody is worshiping the stone, being like, "Oh, this is God." That was literally my whole argument.
I don't know why you would think they would.
Well, you just said they would.
No.
You say God doesn't want people worshiping stones.
I'm aware that's how that sounds. Let me explain deeper. Okay, so in the ancient world, what you didn't do was worship the stone.
Okay.
I mean, you worshipped at the stone, obviously.
Yeah.
But what you believed would happen is that there's a ritual called the mouth opening ceremony. And what they did was they would carve an image, they would dress it up, they would do everything they needed to, and then they would take it down to the river where they had clean, fresh water. They would purify it and wash it in water. Then there was an incantation and a ceremony where they would basically induce what we would say like the spirit of the deity to come and indwell in the stone, much like the Spirit of God came and dwelt in the temple. So they didn't believe that the stone itself was a god. They believed that the god, because it wanted to be among the people, would come down and his presence or her presence would dwell in the stone or in the cult object. And so, for example, in the Hittite text, there's incantation for consecrating a temple of the goddess of the night. And as it turns out, this incantation, they explicitly tell you, is for if you're setting up like a second or a third temple for the goddess of the night. And they have an elaborate ritual to teach you how to say, well, the presence of the deity is over here, but it's going to be over here and over here now. And here's the ritual you need to do so that the presence of this deity will inhabit these idols in this temple, but also these idols in this temple over here. Because remember, the gods aren't limited by material.
Right.
And so this is obviously would help you to understand why so many people were okay with like a Trinitarian doctrine, where they believe that God had this, ethereal presence that could just do anything. It could dwell in a stick. It could dwell in a human. It could split itself in two.
Mm-hmm.
It could do anything he wanted it to. It's a spirit.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't think that anyone was worshiping these idols. That it was their understanding that this was the mechanism by which the presence of their supposed deity would be with them.
Now, people don't do that nowadays, right?
Not usually, not that I know of.
So it feels like this is a commandment for an older time.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. That's actually a really good point. Because like when we think about idols, if the 10 commandments are like these unbreakable rules,
Mm-hmm.
it's weird that this one just doesn't really apply anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like
Right.
I don't know anyone that's forming an idol and worshiping it.
I mean, I always say greed, money is an idol.
But that's a metaphorical idol.
Yeah.
That's not what it's talking about.
No, they're not getting $100 bill and trying to get the god of money to inhabit it. That would be weird.
But yeah,
if that's what it means, then
that's really what it is.
Yeah.
Don't make an idol. Don't do it.
Is it okay to make idols of Jesus?
Well, as long as you don't worship it.
Well, then why can't you make idols of God as long as you don't worship them?
Well, see, the point of an idol is that it was a cultic object. It was for, the worship rituals.
So what if you made one and you made it knowing it wasn't an idol?
You mean like just a painting?
Yeah. Okay, so it's really all in the terminology then.
Yeah, like an idol is not the same as just a physical representation of something.
Okay.
Like you could paint whatever. You could paint a picture of Zeus just because you like how Zeus looked.
Can you make a sculpture?
That wouldn't be the same thing.
Can you make a sculpture of God?
I mean, if you knew what he looked like.
Well, yeah, but I mean, or a sculpture of the gods.
Yeah.
Probably. As long as you weren't going to worship it or whatever.
I think that's what he's suggesting. I don't think he's putting a prohibition on making representations of things.
Mm.
I'm understanding this as saying that you're not going to make cultic items for worship.
Okay.
Because at the time, and you remember in the book of Genesis, you even read when Jacob left with his wives, they stole the household idols, the teraphim, from Laban. I mean, these were things that everybody had. Everybody had a house that was full of different cultic objects, and they would even. So, for example, in the ancient world, they would even have these household idols, and they would have like these mini household temples. I'm not joking. They're like you think of like a shrine that somebody would go to offer sacrifices for their god.
Yeah.
They would have mini shrines. And they would put a mini shrine in their house and put an idol in the mini shrine. They would offer mini sacrifices, like a portion of each meal. They would put before the mini idol and the mini shrine inside the house as a form of ritual cultic practice to show honor to the gods.
Well, did they think that their god was residing in that then? They did.
Yeah, much like people would, they would get these amulets, and this was even popular in Jerusalem. They would get amulets that were supposedly sometimes either blessed by a god, or it would contain a blessing, a spiritual blessing from a god that they thought would imbue them with some sort of protection, like some sort of a magic blessing. This idea that like either a blessing or a curse or, good omen or some sort of a spiritual entity could just indwell into something was pretty common. In fact, there's a book called I think it was Demons and Spirits of Babylonia. I could be quoting it wrong. It was published over 100 years ago now. And there's interesting text in there from ancient Babylon describing sickness, and they're described as like demonic spirits that are wandering the desert, waiting to find weary travelers that they could indwell.
Oh.
And they thought that these were the causes of people's fever and headaches and toothaches and body pains. So they had a really robust view of the spiritual world where spirits could just kind of dwell in anything. They were like the wind. You can't see it, but it's there.
Right.
And so in order to cut that off, God is like, Don't make any idols. Don't make any of these cultic images. Don't do any of that stuff. I don't want any of these spirits in your presence. I don't want any of them before me. Get rid of all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Because just about anything could be an idol in the ancient world if you believe that it was either blessed or cursed or inhabited.
Yeah.
Even there's even rituals of the ancient Near East for how to properly clean your house, so that spirits don't find a welcome place in your house, because they believe that unclean spirits, the ones that causes sickness and disease, unclean spirits only inhabited places that were unclean. And so they actually had rituals for cleaning in a particular way to clean that would make unclean spirits unwelcome.
That's kind of true, though, huh? You know, if your house is all gross and stuff, you'll probably get more diseases in there, right?
Yeah, isn't it interesting how the intelligent world, the intelligent mind of the ancient people, they were putting connections together, but they didn't fully understand. They're like, listen, I know when things are filthy, people get sick.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't realize it was because of germs. They were like, well, there must be a spirit, an unclean spirit, right? And that's one of the things that when you start seeing unclean spirits show up in the Bible, you're like, yeah, but those don't really exist, you know? But that's how everybody in the ancient world kind of understood why was it that uncleanliness led to sickness and, you know, yeah. Number 5?
Yeah.
Or verse 5?
Yeah, I think we did good. You shall not worship them nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, inflicting the punishment of the fathers on the children, on the 3rd and the 4th generations of those who hate me, but showing favor to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments.
Yeah.
This kind of stuff always pisses me off.
I get it. Trust me.
Screw up, would you?
Up?
Oh, for my notes.
Sorry, your notes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, it's not like it's even the only verse to say something similar.
Oh, 34:7 says it.
It's in Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Kings, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel. They all make mention of this generational curse crap. It's funny how we're taught at a very young age not to like hold grudges, but here we are. It's interesting. 2 Kings actually tries to make it okay by suggesting that children are spared from this insanity, but that's actually the only verse to mention that. So I don't know if there's really anything to add, because not really even related to the commandment. It's just, it always pisses me off when it says stuff like that, you know?
I agree. And it's weird. God does have a habit of punishing people for their ancestors' crimes.
Yeah.
And blessing people who don't deserve to be blessed.
Right.
Because of their relative.
Mm-hmm.
For example, how Lot was saved for the sake of Abraham.
Right, yeah. And he was a shitty person.
And how Abiathar was saved.
Abiathar.
Because of his ancestor. And we would say the same with King David. With Solomon. God was upset at Solomon, but he allowed Solomon to live out his life as king, even though God wanted to take him out just like he did with King Saul. But he said, but because your father walked before me so faithfully. I think, well, what does that have to do with Solomon?
I mean, not faithful to his wife, but yeah.
Right, which is another story. He committed quite a few sins.
Yeah.
In fact, in was it chapter 16? I think in 1 Samuel 16. I might have the wrong chapter, but it's in there somewhere. Shortly after he's married to Michal, King David has to go on the run. Someone's after him. It was either Saul or I believe it was still Saul. It wasn't Absalom yet. I could be wrong. It's one of the two. But anyways, Michal, he runs out, and as he's running out, he has Michal put an idol in the bed, and then put goat's hair on it to make it look like somebody is still in bed, like a decoy.
Okay.
But like, why does King David have a graven image in the house? Crazy. This is God's best?
Right.
God's best got the like the second commandment wrong? That's crazy.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's
Yeah, I don't know what else there's to say. Just don't worship other gods. I got it.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Let's do verse 7.
All right. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. So here's an interesting one, because, I'm like, what exactly does it mean to take the Lord's name in vain? Now, I had originally, growing up, assumed it just meant swearing, like, the GD word or, oh my God. But I'm pretty sure now that it actually has something to do with swearing oaths.
Nailed it.
Nice.
Yep. My study Bible agrees. It says it includes swearing falsely, especially in the context of a legal proceeding, but also goes beyond it. In the ancient world, when you did a legal proceeding, when you made a covenant with somebody, whether you were getting married or buying a servant or adopting somebody, it was always signed by actual witnesses, and then it was also signed in the name of your God as a witness, because it was presumed that if you broke your oath, that your God would hold you accountable. And that's what we're actually seeing here. This has nothing to do with somebody saying, OGD, now, trust me, God doesn't want you doing that either. God wants you to respect his name, obviously. But that's not what this commandment is about. This is, and it even says, don't you ever wonder why we have this weird wording, like you shall not take the name of the Lord? And a lot of people don't pause there, but what does it mean to take the name?
Well, use the name.
But they could have said that. They could have said don't use the name, but they didn't.
No, there's always weird language in these Bibles.
Sometimes the weird language is on purpose, because in the actual Hebrew language, it uses the word nasa, which means to bear or to lift, necessarily to carry. Do not carry the name. And this is essentially what you were doing during your oath swearing. You were bearing the name of the Lord upon yourself. You were carrying the name of the Lord. Is not you're representing your oath in the name of that Lord, or name of your God. And so that's really what it's saying here: is that do not bear the name of the Lord carelessly by swearing an oath.
No, you say carelessly. Does that mean you can do it? If you know what I mean? Like, when you're in court, they always say, so help me God. I assume that's in reference to something like this, right?
No, the Old Testament's totally okay with you swearing an oath in the name of your God. They expect that you're going to do it.
Okay, but
if you do it carelessly, that's very upsetting.
Oh, so if you do it but you're telling the truth, it's okay.
Yeah.
But if you do it and you're lying, but you're trying to make people think you're telling the truth by swearing by your God, then God is going to get pretty annoyed.
Yeah, and that's actually what you have here in the text. So when we read in vain, what he's actually suggesting here, or what the author is actually suggesting here, is that he's referring to do it in a manner that is empty, or we would say even meaningless. So it'd be like an empty promise. You've heard that phrase? He's basically saying, do not use the name of the Lord to swear an oath in a manner in which you don't actually intend to keep. And the reason why is because if you do such a thing, I will hold you guilty. And that's what happened when you swore an oath. When you broke the oath, it was up to God to hold you accountable to it, which is why this is the only commandment that comes with, other than about the living a long life for the children obeying their parents, that comes with an actual punishment. It says, because I will not leave him unpunished.
Are some of these commandments really still relevant today?
You think God is punishing people?
Well, I know we still try to follow them, but and I know that there are a lot of fake Republican Christians who are trying to put them in schools. But does God currently, to this day, punish people who break these commandments? Because I've seen a lot of people use, will swear to God, right? and I have not seen them get punished. It's just one of those things where it's like they'll get punished afterward, and it's just a cop out. You know what I mean?
Well, let me tell you why I think this is here.
Okay.
And this goes against the idea that this text is as early as some people want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect that this commandment is here because people knew they could swear oaths falsely or carelessly and not be held accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're like, don't do it. Absolutely don't do it. So if everyone believed that if you swore an oath falsely that you would be punished for it by God, it seems unlikely that you would need a commandment against it.
Yeah, you'd probably already know that, right?
You would know it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
If it was just an obvious conclusion that everybody knew and everybody was following the order, then it would be weird that God would have to come down and say, listen, don't do this.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in reality, the reason why it was here is because mankind knew that they weren't going to get punished for doing it, and they wanted to scare them.
Whoever wrote this wanted to scare people
Right.
into telling the truth. There was never God saying, hey, I'll punish them.
Well, he clearly doesn't.
Right. But these are from God. So do you think that originally it was just, don't take my name in vain, the end? And then somebody else added the punishment part?
Well, that's certainly possible.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a lot of possibilities here because I'm sure these commandments went through a couple of redactions.
Mm-hmm.
I doubt that the text that we have handed down to us is identical to the original.
Yeah. I mean, especially since even nowadays, when you see the 10 Commandments everywhere, it severely truncates them, huh?
Oh, all the time. Yeah. They cut out some of the more harder to stomach parts.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do verses.
It's interesting that they have, don't commit adultery in that one, though, for little children, Yeah, I'm surprised they don't just say there are 9 commandments, okay?
Yeah,
You'll learn about the 10th later.
I would say, though, a lot of kids, if they don't know the word adultery, I think they know what adultery is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not too hard to explain it to them. But certainly if they're young, first or second graders, man, I don't know if you should put in all these commandments in a first grade classroom. They're going to start asking
right.
questions that teachers aren't prepared to answer.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But anyways.
All right. Number 8.
Well, it looks like you've got 8 through 11 is one.
8, 9, 10, and 11, yes.
All right, go ahead.
And there's a reason for that, isn't there?
I believe that to be the case because you usually do one at a time.
I
assume there's a case why you wanted to do a couple of them.
Yes. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. For 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male slave or your female slave, or your cattle or your resident who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and everything that is in them, and he rested on the 7th day. For that reason the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. I mean, this is all just one commandment, So there's no reason to really divide them up, I don't think.
I guess it depends on how many commands you want to group together into the command. It's one classification of command.
No, it's one commandment. And it's a justification for the commandment.
The first commandment is to remember the Sabbath day.
Yeah, but that's not really the commandment.
The second commandment seems to be in verse 10. Let me see. But it's, you shall not do any work. That seems like commandment number 2.
No, it's not, because obviously they're saying, remember, this is a Sabbath, therefore you're not going to do any work, all right? These are not 2 different commandments. Any way you look at it.
I don't know about that.
Oh, yeah, how's this? It says remember the Sabbath. It doesn't say you are commanded to remember the Sabbath. And that's how we know it's a commandment.
Well, remember is a command. It's an imperative. In verse 8, the word remember, probably some
I think they're just saying we got to remember to keep it holy, therefore make sure you don't work.
Yeah, it is. I think it's an imperative. It's a zakor. It's either an infinitive or an imperative, but either way, it's an instruction.
Right. But it's not a command.
Well, I guess what's the difference between an instruction or a command?
An instruction is something that you're told to do. A command is something if you don't do it, you're in trouble.
I don't know if that's the case. I gotta find the parsing.
I mean, it's the difference between asking somebody to do something and demanding, right?
I don't think so. A command and a request are different. One typically has like question mark involved.
I understand.
Let me grab parsing on this. It's an infinitive, which is really interesting. I wonder how they would put an infinitive in there. What was in verse 7? You know, given that there's an infinitive here rather than an imperative, I think you might be right. I think the weird thing is, though, why would you use an infinitive to start a sentence? It's almost like a run-on sentence. Because in English, if we're going to render this like really wooden, literally,
Yeah.
he'd be saying, remembering the Sabbath day, keep it holy. Which, keep it holy is, I assume, an imperative. If I had to guess, but being as I was already wrong about the first one. Let's see what it says.
Think we're going to get through them all tonight?
So, verse 8 is wild. Because in the Hebrew, we got another infinitive. He's saying, remembering the Sabbath day, keeping it holy. For 6 days you shall labor. So verse 8 doesn't actually have any commands. But in English, it's rendered as though it is a kind of a command or an instruction.
Okay.
But it's almost the way it's rendered in the Hebrew is more like, listen, this is the thing that you're doing, and while you're doing it, this is how you do it. Which means you're 100% right in what you said.
Yay.
That verse 8 is
all right, guys, bring out the banner.
Verse 8 is like a blanket, and then all the detail comes following it.
That's what I was saying. Yeah.
I mean, you nailed it.
All right, sweet. Boy, I'm becoming one of them scholars
You're
here.
basically a scholar now.
Yeah. I don't need no college or whatever.
Anyways, that being said, what was your note? I don't think we read your note yet.
Yeah, so the first question, I guess, is what or when exactly is the Sabbath? I know it's Saturday, but why do we Christians act like it's Sunday then? Then again, I suppose the Sabbath begins at sundown on Saturday to sundown on Sunday. And so just to streamline it, we, made it just, one full day. And since it's mostly on Sunday, we just said, forget it, we'll have it there, But, does it even say anywhere in the Bible that it's supposed to begin Saturday at sundown? That would be, you know what I mean?
Well, the Sabbath is defined, and we read part of it way back in Exodus 12 when we had the instructions for the Passover.
Go ahead.
The Sabbath starts at sundown of Friday and lasts until sundown on Saturday.
Oh, I was like totally wrong.
Yeah, their day. We count our days at the beginning of the sunlight. They start their days at the end of the sunlight because their calendar is lunar based.
Okay.
Our calendar is solar based. We're tracking the sun. They're tracking the moon. So the beginning of all their days is when the moon appears.
When they go to bed?
Basically.
That's weird. Isn't that weird?
No.
A little weird.
I don't think so.
That's a lot weird.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Very weird.
I don't think so.
Doesn't make any sense at all. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, then why do we go for Sunday, I guess?
Oh, because that's the day Jesus rose. It was theorized in the early church that Sunday would be the day that you would worship Jesus because he was he rose like the sun, and sun was named after
Hmm.
the rising sun. Um, and so there was just like this movement of like, well, Sunday is the day that we commemorate Jesus' resurrection and Jesus himself, sing hymns and whatnot. And eventually, um, when they moved to a solar calendar, they just smushed the Sabbath day with the day of Jesus and said, "Well, I guess it doesn't really, it doesn't really matter anymore because we're not bound by the law." Because remember that they're not bound by the law. There's some debate in early churches how they could not be bound by the law and then still be held to the Ten Commandments, because a lot of them found some tension there. But even
Jesus said he came to fulfill them, right? Right? The laws?
What do you think fulfill means?
I don't know. Well, I thought it meaning, yeah, you still got to do them. But it's very possible what he meant was, he made it so they no longer need to exist.
Right.
But people
I will cover
to,
that in a second.
People seem to pick and choose with that, though. So
the note in the Catechism Study Bible says the third commandment enjoins us to observe a weekly day of worship and rest in commemoration of God's rest after his work of creation. The early Christians fulfilled this commandment by observing Sunday as the Lord's Day and setting it aside for Eucharistic worship and rest. This commandment obliges the faithful to attend Mass each Sunday and on holy days, so on and so forth. So, because their religion kind of revolved around Jesus, and Jesus was, in their view, doing something different than the law of Moses, they thought, okay, switching it as the final day of the week, as a day of rest. That being said, Jesus himself never said that the law was done away with. In fact, he said the opposite.
I know. That. He said, I didn't come to abolish them, but to fulfill them.
Right.
So maybe that means he's saying they're not abolished, but you don't have to do them anymore because I died for you.
Unfortunately, that's not how it reads.
Okay.
Because we'll pull it up real quick, because I can understand why you would get that impression if you didn't read verse 18 and 19. Verse 17.
Read Matthew a lot.
Says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill. So the first thing we know is that fulfill does not mean abolish. They're actually used as opposites. So fulfill can't mean that the law goes away, because abolish means that the law goes away.
It just is a different thing,
It doesn't say that.
I know, I'm just saying. I think it would work, though.
It doesn't.
No, I'm just saying, you tell me what it is, but I'm just saying it could have.
If you fulfill the law of buckling your seatbelt, does the law change after you buckle your seatbelt?
Just read your thing.
Literally, the definition of a law is that's how you fulfill it, by doing it. But it says, for truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass away from the law.
I think the idea is that if it were seatbelts,
I don't think you should comment until you listen to the rest of this, because you're going to be silly when you do.
Oh.
So he says, until heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or tittle is going to pass away from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks even one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. According to Jesus, the law is here until heaven and earth pass away.
Yeah, but listen, I think that, you're talking about seatbelts and the laws to wear a seatbelt. Well, I think Jesus would have come to fulfill the law by saying, okay, you don't have to do that anymore because we're all wearing seatbelts now.
That's not how that works.
I know, but it sounds like it could be.
You have to wear the seatbelt next time?
It's always on.
And the time after that?
It's always on.
That's not how that works.
Okay, but it makes...
There's no metaphorical seatbelt.
All right, but it made sense.
There's no metaphorical law.
I know, but if there was, there would have been. If there was, there would have been. Okay. Just saying.
How do you metaphorically fulfill a law?
Well, by dying and coming back.
That's not how that works. You're an English major. You know how words work. Now you're gaslighting yourself.
Oh, is that right?
Telling yourself that words don't mean words.
Uh-huh. I think you're doing that. All right.
It literally cannot mean the law goes away.
No, that's fine. I'm just saying.
That's what they're accusing him of doing.
No, I'm just saying it could have.
We'll try this again. In Matthew 5, they're accusing him of trying to modify or get rid of the law of Moses during the Sermon on the Mount.
Right, I'm not saying he is.
And then he says, no, that's not what I'm doing. Do not think that I'm come to abolish the law. So he said, don't think that I've come to get rid of this.
Mm-hmm.
He's saying, I've come to do it the right way. He's not saying he's getting rid of it. He's saying he's actually come to do it. That doesn't mean it goes away.
Okay.
That's why he said, until heaven and earth pass away, not a jot or tittle will pass away from the law.
Well, then why do people think, Christians think they don't have to obey the Old Testament laws?
Because people who came after Jesus had different ideas, and they wrote before they knew what Jesus said. So in the book of Acts, we read about a vision that Peter is given of a sheet coming down from heaven, roughly about chapter 10. And God visits him in a dream and says that I declare that these animals are now clean to eat. And Peter understood this as a reference to God getting rid of some of the Mosaic law. And then also Paul himself found it troubling that the Gentiles should have to follow the law. And Paul convened with the apostles in Acts chapter 15. They got together and they said, what are we supposed to do with these Gentiles? Because they're not really part of God's covenant, and we don't really know if they should be following these laws.
Now, Paul's a Gentile, right?
No, Paul's a Jew.
Maybe.
He literally says he's a Pharisee of Pharisees.
Oh.
He's a Jew.
Oh, well, okay, whatever.
Paul is a Jew.
Okay.
So
wait, but he was killing Jews, right?
Killing Christians.
Okay. I think really?
In Acts 22, it says that he got letters from the Sanhedrin to go round up the Christians.
Because I thought a lot of the Christians were... Wait. I thought a lot of people were killing the Jews. So it's funny that they would turn around and kill the Christians, right? What?
Huh?
Because they've been subjugated for a long time now. All right, we're done.
The Romans were occupying Palestine/Israel.
Yeah.
And the Jewish people lived there.
Mm-hmm.
And the Jewish people didn't like the Christians. And so Paul was rounding up the Christians because they were seen as instigators. And they didn't want trouble with Rome because there were instigators in the land.
Okay.
Let me give you an analogy. If I put you in a classroom of 100 kids,
mm-hmm.
and I say, if any of your kids act up, you're in trouble because you're in charge.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's happening here. The Romans had Jewish authorities in charge of their own territories, even though there were governors over top of them that were Roman. And when people inside of their territory caused problems for the Roman government, then there was hell to pay on the Jewish authorities. So the Jewish authorities, when there were rebels or cult offshoots that were messianic, that were causing trouble, they wanted to squash it. So Paul was given authority to go round up these Christians so that the Christians weren't causing trouble in Judea and therefore not provoking Rome to action.
He was given authority.
Permission?
No, I'm asking. Somebody in government told him to do this?
I said that. Acts 22.
I
he
know.
Got papers from the Sanhedrin.
I appreciate that, but we're going to come up on something like that tonight.
We're not.
Yes, we are.
Not in Exodus.
Yeah.
Paul does not appear in the book of Exodus.
No, but something similar that relates to him does.
Perhaps. What I'm saying is, Jesus never said the law was going away. That was an invention of the Apostle Paul with the help of Peter and James. And they envisioned that this was possibly only temporary until the Gentiles were capable of learning the law of Moses. Because in Acts chapter 15, when they issue a decree, they say, well, we'll only give them 4 commands to follow. and that'll be good enough for now because the law of Moses is taught in all of the synagogues, which seems to imply
That's interesting.
That, from that council, the law wasn't mandatory at first. You can have like a gentle start,
Yeah.
and then they would learn it as they go because they weren't Jews. But Paul took it further. Paul ran away and said, no, nobody should follow the law anymore. It's faith by grace alone. No law is necessary. In fact, he says in Galatians chapter 3, I think verse 23, says the law was our temporary schoolmaster until Christ came. So according to the Apostle Paul, at some point he figured that the law was done away with.
So James and Peter, those were disciples? Well, then Peter got a revelation then.
That, according to the book of Acts.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's pretty good proof that God wanted them abolished, right?
No, I think it's proof that the author of Acts didn't know what was said in the book of Matthew by Jesus and created a contradiction.
Well, then that would mean Paul's writings didn't know what Jesus said either.
Yep. Because both Paul lived before the Gospel of Matthew was written.
Oh, how do you know that?
Because the Gospel of Matthew is quoting from the Gospel of Mark most of the time, and Mark wasn't written until roughly 70 A.D. Mark was a traveling companion of Paul and Peter, and who was the cousin of Barnabas. So he didn't write until roughly 70 or even later, maybe in the late 60s at the earliest. And so Matthew and Luke are copying from Mark, so they had to have written later after Mark was already completed. Now, Paul's ministry was in the 50s and 60s, which means a lot of Paul's letters lack the awareness of what was written in the Gospels because he was doing ministry before the Gospels were even written.
That's weird.
So Paul's writings are actually earlier than the Gospels, which is why we find in the Gospels words of Jesus that seem to contradict words of Paul, because Paul was unaware of what was in these texts because they didn't exist yet.
You feel like he would have just known what Jesus was all about if he was allowed to write the Bible, right?
Yeah, he just wrote with the authority of God.
Or did he write with what he thought was the authority of God?
I think so. I got to be honest. I think Paul was a heretic. I think he was a lousy Jew. I think he didn't understand the Old Testament. He misquotes it half the time. And I think he disagrees with Jesus. And if I have to pick between Jesus and Paul, I'm going with Jesus every time.
Do you know how many times Christians quote Paul, though?
Most people, a lot of seminarians and Bible college students have been reminded that Christianity probably could be renamed as Paulianity, because the majority of what we know about Christianity really comes from Paul, not from the Gospel. If people got rid of Paul's writings, Christianity would look very different.
A lot better?
I don't know if it would be better. It's not that I dislike the writings of Paul. I'm just saying that it would look very different. Jesus was a Judaizer. In fact, he says he came for the lost sheep of Israel. When the Syrophoenician woman came to him, wanting her was a daughter or son healed, I forget now. He called her a dog. That I only came for the lost sheep of Israel. And she was like, well, even the dog gets to eat scraps from the master's table. And then he was like, oh, great faith. But anyways, the long and short of it is Jesus' mission was to the Jew, and Paul saw his mission as to the Gentiles.
Okay.
And so Paul kind of felt at liberty to change things up because he's like, well, the Gentiles are a different people group. But the reality is Paul just flat out contradicted the words of Jesus. And he even contradicted the words of Acts, because in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, he says, you're at liberty to eat the meat sacrificed to the idols. But in Acts chapter 15, one of the only 4 commandments that they say that you must give to the Gentiles was to not eat meat sacrificed to idols.
What were the others?
Not to eat the blood of the sacrificed animal. And then what was the other one? Now I forget.
So the Christians still had to do sacrifices?
No, they didn't have to.
Oh, but if they did, don't eat it?
No, don't eat the blood. So, therefore, I've reached the decision that we should not trouble those Gentiles who are turning to God, but we should write to them to abstain only from things polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, and from whatever has been strangled, and from blood. For in every city, from generations past, Moses and those who proclaim him for generations past, Moses has had those who proclaim him, for he has been read aloud every Sabbath in the synagogues. So there seems to be this idea that he's saying to the Gentiles, here are the 4 must-do things, and the rest you'll hear in the synagogues later.
So who wrote this?
Well, this was written by
Paul?
Whoever wrote the book of Luke and Acts.
Oh, so this is not Paul.
No.
Okay, so these are the 4 things they needed to tell the Christians.
According to the council that was held in Jerusalem between Paul and the disciples.
Oh, boy. Paul was involved in this?
Paul was there, yeah. In fact, if you go all the way back to the beginning of the chapter, says, then certain individuals came down from Judea and were teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved.
Ugh.
And after Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and debate with them, Paul and Barnabas and some of the others were appointed to go up to Jerusalem to discuss this question with the apostles and the elders. So they have this big old meeting about what are we supposed to do between these Gentiles turning to God and the law of Moses. And they seem to be of the opinion that it's likely good for them to follow the law of Moses, but not required for them to follow the law of Moses.
Okay.
Which is wild because Christians will say, well, we don't have to follow any of that law.
Right.
But then they'll get crazy bent out of shape when you suggested that also means you don't have to follow the 10 Commandments. Because now they just want to have their cake and eat it too. We don't want to follow the law, except the laws that we like.
Right.
We don't have to follow any of those laws, but it's awful to for a man to lie with another man because Leviticus says so.
Right.
But listen, are you bound to Leviticus or you're not? You know what I mean? But that's another discussion for time. My point being, with all this is, as far as we can tell, Jesus was not against the law and never intended the law to pass away. He thought the law was going to go on forever until the new heaven and the new earth came. But even according to the Old Testament, there's still going to be the law of Moses happening in that time period, according to all of the prophets. It's just that it seems like some of it won't quite necessarily be needed anymore because people aren't going to be sinning or hurting each other anymore.
Hurting.
And
like some of them are just not relevant.
Yeah, they'll become irrelevant at that point. But like the sacrificial laws appear to still be going to be in place according to Ezekiel, Isaiah 66, Jeremiah 33. And it seems to be the case that people are still going to worship God with offerings and sacrifices according to the prophets.
But we don't do that.
No.
Do the Jews? Nobody does it, right?
Not so because they don't have access to a temple. But if they had access to a temple, they would restart offerings and sacrifices.
What do you mean? They go to temple all the time.
It has to be in the right location.
Where's that?
A location they don't have access to, because it's divided between them and the Muslims and one other group I can't.
Everybody has to sacrifice in one location.
Well, yeah, because when the Bible was written, they had no idea how big the world was.
Yeah, well then that can't be followed today then.
Look, all right, let's backtrack.
Okay.
Sacrifices could be in your regional location, except for the once a year sacrifice that was happening in Jerusalem, like the Day of Atonement.
Okay.
That happened with the actual Levitical priests. But you could do burnt offerings and whatnot in your own location, and that seemed to be clear because when they went into Babylonian exile, God was okay with them doing whatever they could given their remote location. That being said, the Bible didn't know how big the world was, and when all the sacrificial laws were made, everything was written as though the people would be, at least at some point, commuting to Jerusalem. And they even envisioned that some people would be commuting a long distance. Because it said if the distance is great for you, rather than bringing an animal to sacrifice, you can bring money, and then you can buy an animal there.
So it is just laws that are not relevant anymore.
Would be if there was a temple.
Well, no, if they can't get there, then it's not relevant.
What I'm saying is the Bible envisioned a future in which they would always be relevant, because it didn't know how big the world was.
Mm-hmm.
Thing.
So did Jews do that?
Did who do what?
Did you sacrifice burnt offerings at home?
Sometimes.
Really?
Not in their home, obviously.
Well, I don't know, wherever it is. I don't know.
Yeah, they had shrines.
In their house?
No.
Remember how there were those little tiny ones?
Yeah, but those are more like word I'm looking for, goodwill gestures.
And then they eat the food anyhow.
Those weren't part of like your ritual observance.
All right.
Because a lot of your ritual observance, like the Catholic high days, like how Catholics have holy days, like feast days.
Yeah.
The Jews did too, and you had a specific thing that you needed to do on those days. But like just in your everyday life, you could use like those little, household shrines.
Those weren't for God anyhow, right?
Not for Yahweh. No, Yahweh wasn't about that.
Right.
He didn't like that at all.
So they did a lot of animal sacrifices back in the day.
Oh yeah.
But you're saying,
I mean, just an endless flow of blood.
Well, what a lot of people seem to think is that Jesus was the sacrifice.
The final sacrifice.
Right.
According to the book of Hebrews, yes.
Now, is that,
Is it?
Is that because you're talking about all the other laws and it's like some are abolished, some are not?
Well, I don't think any of them are.
Well,
according to the Old Testament and according to Jesus, they are forever.
Except for the sacrifices, because...
Right, because it's a form of worship.
Wait, what?
The sacrifices are a form of worship.
Okay.
That's why God says they're going to go on forever.
Oh, so Jesus didn't make them obsolete.
He couldn't have, not according to the prophets.
But that's what everybody says. Everybody says that's why we stopped doing sacrifices.
And that's why the Jews aren't Christian. Because they actually read the Old Testament.
But they're not doing it, right?
They will do it as soon as they're capable of doing it.
That seems like a technicality, doesn't it?
Not a technicality.
I mean...
They're following the law to a T. The law states where you're supposed to be doing these sacrifices.
Jesus said you shouldn't follow the law to the T.
I disagree with that.
No.
He actually wanted you to follow the law to a T.
Jesus?
Plus some.
No, not Jesus.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
He said the law was made... Wait.
He said your righteousness needs to exceed even that of the Pharisees.
No. He said the laws were made for men, not men for the law.
That's not what he said. He said that so that you know that the Sabbath was made for the Son of Man, not the Son of Man for the Sabbath.
Yeah, there you go.
He's referring to himself as the Son of Man, which is an apocalyptical figure who is akin to the highest divine being next to God.
So what actually it means, is they were talking about, like, say, David when he was eating stuff on the Sabbath.
And somewhere, Mark chapter 2, verse 26.
And Jesus is saying, yeah, I know what the law says, but, there's the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. So you should do the spirit of the law, not the letter of it. Because these laws are made for your protection, not so you can go hungry.
I think you've missed a whole point. So first of all, he wasn't violating any commands of Moses. He was violating an oral tradition.
Who was?
Jesus was violating an oral command from the teaching of the elders, not from Moses. But his suggestion about Sabbath being for the Son of Man, nothing to do with us. Not about you, not about me. The Son of Man is a messianic title.
Okay.
It was derived during the intertestamental period from the book of Enoch and from the book of Esdras and Baruch, and also from the book of Daniel. It's a messianic figure who in Daniel chapter 7 receives all power and authority from on high from God, and then he has dominion over all the world. And Jesus is equating himself to the Son of Man in that passage.
Well, then why is he saying that what David did was not wrong?
Because David didn't even do anything wrong. He didn't. Well, actually, he did. He ate the showbread. He shouldn't have ate the showbread. It's supposed to be for the priests. But luckily, David was actually a priest in the order of Melchizedek, according to Psalm 110.
Oh, so a little technicality there.
There's a technicality
saved
there.
him, huh?
There's a technicality there.
You know, I got to be honest. I think I like my interpretation better.
I might like it better, but that doesn't make sense if you're actually understanding what Jesus is saying. The Son of Man is not referring to us. He would have said the sons of man or mankind. He knows what those words mean.
Mankind is not in the Bible, though.
The Son of Man is a single entity.
No, I think it's.
Yep.
I think it's like mankind.
Nope.
Where it's a single one that
wrong
is representative.
Not even close. Jesus calls himself the Son of Man on like 50 different occasions. It is a specific reference to a messianic figure.
Well, what do they call humans?
Sons of men.
So very, very similar.
I'm sure it is, yes. And they only do it in the Old Testament. It doesn't show up in the New Testament.
Okay.
The title, The Son of Man, is a messianic figure that everybody knew what it meant. That's why Jesus called himself the Son of Man.
And what does that mean?
On 100 different occasions. It's a reference to Daniel chapter 7. And you just haven't read Daniel 7.
No.
Okay, I'll read it to you. Don't worry.
Cool.
Daniel 7 says, and he quotes it on a number of occasions, like when he says, to Caiaphas, henceforth you'll see me coming on the clouds of heaven. This is a reference to Daniel chapter 7, how the Son of Man comes. So in Daniel chapter 7, it says, as the vision during the night continued, I saw coming on the clouds of heaven one like a son of man. When he reached the Ancient of Days, he was presented before him. He received dominion, splendor, and kingship. All nations, people, and tongues will serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away. His kingship, one that shall not be destroyed. And this passage took on a messianic tone during the intertestamental period, and Jesus understood himself as being this person who inherited all authority over everything from God, which is why he's suggesting that he alone is greater than any authority on earth.
Which is why it was okay for David to eat that.
David has nothing to do with what Jesus is doing.
Okay. They talk about David to Jesus, right?
Yep.
And so what Jesus is saying is, yeah, maybe, I don't know, but I'm in charge, so screw off, or what? Sounds like what he's saying.
David didn't do the thing Jesus was doing.
Right. What was Jesus doing?
Jesus was just plucking grains of wheat and eating them, which you were allowed to do.
Then why did they make a big deal about it?
Because it was against the oral law.
Oh, but nobody cares about that.
That all the Pharisees and Jews did, just not Jesus.
Well, okay, but it wasn't real law, so that's...
was.
I mean, not
just
real.
Not to Jesus.
Not to anybody. It was just, just crap they made up.
But not to them. They didn't think.
I know, but I'm just saying in real life. That's why Jesus felt that way, because it really wasn't real.
Yes, Jesus cared not for the oral law. He only cared about the law of Moses.
Right, and that makes sense, a lot more sense, right? To go with what's in the Bible and not just what some, blowhards have to say about it, right? So we're in agreement.
Maybe? I don't know where we're at anymore.
We're halfway in agreement, but halfway not, because I still like my interpretation,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't fully know what you're getting at the moment, but we'll read Mark, the section you're referring to. It says, and he was passing through the field of grain on the Sabbath. His disciples began to make a path while plucking heads of grain. At this, the Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he was in need and he and his companions were hungry, how he went into the house of God and Abiathar the high priest," which was the wrong high priest, it was Ahimelech, ate the bread of offering that was only, sorry, that only the priest could lawfully eat, and he shared it with his companions. Then he said to them, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath."
That's what I just said.
Although there's a footnote because I don't think the text actually says man. Let me see what the asterisk for the text actually says. I don't see where the asterisk pointing to yet.
I feel like I've been vindicated.
You might have been.
Okay, good, because I thought he was making a really good
because
point.
In verse 28, the other asterisk says, "That is why the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath." Is Lord. The Son of Man is Lord. He is the Son of Man. He is the Lord of the Sabbath because he's the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 7. Right?
I mean, my translation makes more sense, though. They're like, "Why are you doing that?" And Jesus is like, "Guys, gotta obey the spirit of the law, not the letter." That's what I think. But you're like, "Guys, I'm Jesus. I can do whatever I want." See what I'm saying?
I think there's a little bit of both in there, but I think what Jesus is suggesting is that Sabbath was made for man and for God, which is clear in the Old Testament. But he's not breaking one of the laws of Moses. He's not saying that you can now break the laws of Moses.
But I think he's also saying that if you need to, you can bend them.
But he wasn't bending one.
I know, but if you needed to.
But he didn't say that.
I'm just saying if he needed to, he could.
But he didn't say that.
You know, because the laws were made for man.
But he didn't say that.
Well, you read between the lines.
It's not in there.
That's why you have to read between the lines, because there are no words in between the lines.
So you just add stuff to the Bible?
No. Interpret it differently. New topic. My point is, we're done.
But my point is this. Jesus did not violate a law of Moses.
Right, yeah.
In this narrative. He's not saying that I'm changing or doing away with the law of Moses. What he's fighting against is the oral law, the tradition of the elders.
Okay.
The stuff that was different than outside of the law of Moses, and he's hearkening back to the Old Testament to show, look, even King David was eating the bread on the Sabbath that was for the priests.
Okay.
Like he was doing work on the Sabbath. He took his whole men and traveled to go to the priest at Nob and ate the bread.
And
you're not supposed to travel on the Sabbath.
Okay, so he did it bad. So why was he not punished?
That's what I'm saying. Is well, David was on the run, first of all, but he's saying that King David was doing stuff on the Sabbath that was not breaking the Sabbath necessarily, because he's eating. He's providing for himself. Like, you have to eat.
That's what I just said. Sabbath was made for man. And so even if you had to bend it a little bit, it made sense.
Yeah. You listen, if you have to travel a little ways to eat,
yeah,
like you have to go collect your grain,
yeah,
you're allowed to go collect that grain. But according to the tradition of the elders, you couldn't do anything on the Sabbath. Like, they had rules about how far you could carry a pot. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And Jesus is making a point here, like, hey, obeying the Sabbath is not, according to the law of Moses, is not necessarily what you think it is. You know what I mean? Like, obeying the Sabbath meant something in the law of Moses, right? Obeying the Sabbath to the Pharisees meant a whole ridiculous set of things. Like, can you even tie your sandals? Do you have to cook your food the day before so you don't do any cooking?
Oh my!
You see what I'm saying? Like, they had these crazy rules around the Sabbath that made it so you literally couldn't do anything on that day. There's like nothing you could do. And whereas in the Old Testament, that wasn't really the vision of the Sabbath. And Jesus, as far as I can tell, Jesus in this passage is trying to say the way the Sabbath was imagined by the God of the Bible of Moses is not the way that you guys are imagining it. But nevertheless, it doesn't matter because I'm the Lord of the Sabbath anyways. He can do anything he wants to.
It's kind of both, right?
I agree. Yeah,
Okay.
I think he's saying two things here.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But when he says that the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath, that is a divine statement. He's calling himself the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 7, saying that he's going to inherit all the kingdoms of the world. He's in control of everything. Like, this is a very strong statement.
Okay, I didn't really feel like that.
Like that's akin to committing. It is the closest thing you can get to blasphemy without committing blasphemy.
Mm.
Being the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 7 is like the highest status you can get. Because you read it with me. God literally lowers, comes on the clouds of heaven and gives all power and authority to this figure.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
He's saying he's God, right?
Well, he's saying he's getting the authority of God.
Mm.
I don't know if necessarily he's saying he is God, but in the book of John, he does. In the book of John, he equates himself as being God, basically. You know what I mean?
Mm.
The long and short of it is, I have no idea what any of that was about, how we ended up there. The long and short of it is, we were talking about the law. In no point in time did Jesus envision the law of Moses needing to be like kicked to the curb. That was something that Paul envisioned, and whoever wrote the book of Acts. I find it doubtful that the Jerusalem Council went down the way it's pictured. But Paul, for sure, Paul thought that the law was gone, and whoever wrote the book of Hebrews thought the same thing. James disagreed.
James, the brother of Jesus?
Yeah.
He agreed with Jesus? So you might want to believe him more, right?
Yeah, James...
Because he was with Jesus, right? You know?
In fact, James seems to have written his book, or his letter rather, as a rebuttal to Paul's writings.
Oh.
A lot of people believe that James was actually trying to address the teachings of Paul at that time period that he thought were wrong.
Okay.
And that's why you hear in James, faith without works is dead. And there's a really interesting passage because he specifically is rebutting this idea that salvation is simply through faith. Because he says even the demons believe.
Right.
Okay, well, if even the demons believe, then obviously you can't just get into heaven because you believe in something, right? It says to be doers of the word. And no, dear brothers, everyone should be quick to hear. So therefore, put away all filth and evil, excess, and humbly welcome the word that has been planted in you and is able to save your souls. Be doers of the word, not hearers only, deluding yourselves. So on and so blah 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 blah. Where's the good stuff? Must be in chapter 2. Yep. Blah blah blah. Yeah, there we go. What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can faith save him? If a brother or sister has nothing to wear and has no food for the day, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm, and eat well," but you do not give him the necessities of the body, what good is it? Also, faith of itself, if it does not have works, is dead. Indeed, some may say, you have faith and I have works. Demonstrate your faith to me without works, and I will demonstrate my faith to you from my works. You say that you believe God is one, and you do well. Even the demons believe and tremble. Do you want proof, you ignoramus, that faith without works is useless? Was not Abraham your father justified by works when he offered his son Isaac up to the altar? You see that faith is active along with works, and faith was completed by works. Thus the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he is called a friend of God. See how a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. So James is like really pushing back on this, and for a good reason, because like it doesn't make sense that you can just believe something and that automatically believing something makes you a good person now.
Yeah, right. Because a lot of Christians believe that, and they're not good people.
Right.
Bam.
Yeah, and it also really pushes back on this idea of because Jesus in the book of Matthew, in Matthew 25, remember the judgment scene when Jesus comes back and separates the goat from the sheep and what?
Well, wheat
No?
from chaff.
Well, okay, so in Matthew 25, if you go to verse 31, it says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory. Remember what I said about the Son of Man?
Yeah.
When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, just like Daniel chapter 7, he will sit upon the glorious throne, and all the nations will be assembled before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep on his right and the goats on his left, and the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food, and I was thirsty, and you gave me drink, a stranger, and you welcomed me, naked, and you clothed me, ill, and you cared for me, in prison, and you visited me." So he's separating the righteous people in Matthew 25 based on their works, on what they're doing, not on what they believed.
Okay, that's Matthew?
Matthew 25.
Well, I've read that book a lot, and I didn't get that out.
What criteria is he separating people on?
No, I mean, I didn't get that. I didn't get anything.
You didn't read that part.
No, I did. I just didn't understand it.
Oh, okay.
It's one of those things where you're like, oh, I get it. It's just whatever. And then, you know what I mean?
Right.
You don't really think of the greater meaning behind it.
Right. So in the judgment scene, Jesus is literally judging people based on their behavior, not based on what they believe.
Mm.
And remember when Jesus cast out the demons, the demons called Legion?
Yeah.
When he confronts the demons, they say, "What have you to do with us, Jesus, Son of God? Have you come before it's our time?" So even in the narratives, the demons know who he is.
Mm-hmm.
They believe who Jesus is. They know what Jesus is going to do, because he said, "Have you come before it's our time?"
Mm-hmm.
So this idea that you can merely just believe something and get a golden ticket in heaven is nonsensical to everybody except for Paul.
Yeah, and it also works well for the idea that non-Christians can get into heaven if they're good people.
That's a really good point, because if Jesus is concerned, and the law of Moses is concerned, that people behave a particular way, then it makes much more sense that God's not going to send you to hell because you just weren't convinced of something.
Mm.
That's ridiculous.
Right.
For example, like if you grow up and you only encounter the gospel a couple times, and the way that you encountered it didn't make any sense to you, and you're like, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Mm.
But you lived your entire life completely selfless, doing the things that Jesus wanted you to do. It really stretches the imagination that God is like, well, you weren't convinced. I guess you have to burn for eternity now.
It doesn't stretch the imagination, though, for a lot of Christians.
Right.
Which confusing.
Well, for a lot of Christians, that's how they scare you into the church.
It's funny. I was listening to the radio, and this pastor did say that,
it doesn't matter if you're a good person. You have to give your life to Jesus.
Well, they're basically saying we need to go talk to all these people, because it doesn't matter what they believe. They're going to go to hell if they don't believe.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I'm like, whoa. This is the reason you need to be a Christian, so you don't go to hell. Nothing else. You don't go to hell. That's it.
Yeah, it's fire insurance. Basically.
Right, yeah.
Which is weird, because if people convert to the faith for merely just because they didn't want to go to hell, wouldn't that be disappointing to God? Like,
right.
For example, like if you asked a girl out on a date and she went out on a date with you, and then it turned out you discovered that she didn't actually like you, and she was like, "Well, I just went on the date with you because you were really angry and I thought you might beat me up if I said no."
Yeah.
Well, you'd be really disappointed. You'd be like, "Well, I actually wanted you to be in a relationship with me," right?
That's a good analogy.
But this is the image of God that modern Christianity has painted, that he's like this barbarian that's like, I want to have a relationship with you, but also I'm going to force you into it by scaring you into hell.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And to be fair, there are some Bible passages outside of Jesus that could lead you to this conclusion. And there are a couple passages in the book of John that could lead you to this conclusion. But John is different. John was written way later, and John's vision of Jesus is altogether different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John is the one that comes along as saying crazy things like, no man can possibly come to the Father except through Jesus. Like, wait, what? That wasn't in the other Gospels.
Okay.
Jesus said in the other Gospels to the rich young ruler, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And he says, you have the commandments of Moses, follow those.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus won when Lazarus and the rich man, when you see that vision, the rich man goes to hell or whatever he goes to torment, and Lazarus doesn't. And what does the guy suffering want?
Water.
He wants his relatives be told about told about this terrible place.
He didn't ask for water.
Well, obviously he did, but he wants his brothers and sisters to not end up there.
Right.
And Jesus doesn't say, well, if they believe in me. What he does say is, well, they had Moses and the prophets. Right? How do you prevent yourself from going to this place? You're not a greedy rich person, and you follow Moses and the prophets. And Moses and the prophets is, by following the law of Moses, you'll be doing what is righteous.
Unfortunately, that kind of says hell does exist, right?
Well, I'm not suggesting that there's no hell according to the New Testament. There's definitely hell in the New Testament.
Okay.
That's for sure. But in the in the book of Deuteronomy, God says that if you follow this law, you'll be doing what is good and righteous in the sight of the Lord your God. And Jesus said that your righteousness must exceed even that of the Pharisees. And Jesus at every point upheld the law of Moses. So I have no other thing to believe, concerning the law and the 10 Commandments, is that they're forever.
All right. So the Jews say they don't believe in Jesus. They should still be able to get to heaven, then, right?
You would think so.
If they're still
God's chosen people.
Well, if they're still obeying the laws.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Chosen people are not.
Well, so, the Catholic and some of the older denominations have a fix for this. Not a fix, but they have a better understanding of the afterlife, I would say.
Okay.
So, according to the Catholics, if you don't believe in Jesus, then you are judged based on your life, your works, your righteousness. If you do believe in Jesus, then you kind of like have the golden ticket, unless you were like faking it. Like if you just went to church, claimed you were a Christian, but you weren't actually a real Christian. But if you actually were a real Christian, then you kind of like get this golden ticket, like into heaven, right? But for everybody else, unless you were terrible, unless you're like Hitler, you basically end up in purgatory. You pay for your sins in purgatory, and then you end up in heaven. So purgatory, in the Jewish view, and Catholics adopted, this idea of purgatory is similar to what the Jewish people believe. So if we read the writings of the Jews, they say, well, you go to the flames of torment and purgation for up to 12 months to pay for your sins, and then you can enter paradise. The Catholics have a similar idea, except they have 3 places: heaven, purgatory, and hell. And in purgatory, you pay for your sins before you go to heaven, and hell is reserved for people who have committed such atrocities that they can never pay for their sin, like Hitler. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So the Catholic view of the afterlife is more palatable than the Protestant view of the afterlife, because it bakes in this idea that, like, listen, if somebody lives a really good life and they do all the things Jesus wants them to do, but they don't really understand or believe the gospel, God's not going to be like, oh, I guess you got to burn forever now. You know what I mean? So I think that's more palatable. And even when I was like really deep in Protestant faith, I still always kind of believed in the Catholic view of the afterlife because it just makes more sense.
Mm-hmm.
And it matches with the Bible. Like there's enough in the Bible that you could put together a pretty sound doctrine of purgatory, especially if you include the apocryphal books, which you should include because they were canon. The Protestants were the ones that got rid of them.
Okay.
They weren't added in the Catholic Bible. The Protestants took them out of the Bible.
Hmm.
That's another.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time on that one paragraph. I suppose we should move on, or we're gonna be here all night.
We're done. It's 9:20, bro. Yeah.
Been doing this for 2 hours already?
Hour and 40 minutes.
Didn't even get halfway through it.
That happens.
Guess we'll have to do it again next week.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, I'm like, that's annoying. But on the other hand, I'm actually learning.
Well, these are important conversations. Like, what position does the law have in Christianity? Because even though, if you ask 100 Christians that question, you'll get 100 answers. And as it turns out, the New Testament is even divided. So how could Christians possibly know if the New Testament isn't entirely clear?
Yeah.
Right. But I think if you really believe that the words of Jesus are recorded accurately, then I think you just have to follow what Jesus said. Right. Like I said before, if you have to pick between Paul and Jesus, I'm picking Jesus every time. And Jesus at every turn said to follow that law. Right. And of the laws that you can follow, a lot of them are laws that most people agree with. Other than like the dietary laws, nobody wants to follow those.
Yeah.
Bacon, come on. Actually, there are some pretty horrific laws now I'm thinking about. There's some laws that people shouldn't be following.
Okay.
Testing women for virginity and that. I don't think that'd go over well in modern society.
Well, I guess we'll get into that in Exodus, right?
Deuteronomy 22 is where that one shows up.
That's going to be a long time from now, right?
But the very next chapter, Exodus 21, we do cover slavery and concubinage.
Yeah.
Not to say that there's not some good laws in Exodus 21. There's some good ones in there. Like laws against kidnapping free people and trying to pass them off as slaves. That's a good thing. If you have a slave and you beat them so badly that you knock out their eye, then their 7-year period is cut short and they go free early. That's a good law. It limits how badly you can beat your slave.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
You shouldn't be owning slaves to begin with, but at least there's limits to what you could do to them.
Yeah, it's messed up.
I know, it's pretty messed up.
That's the excuse Christians always make. Well, they weren't as bad as other people who enslaved.
They were worse.
They could have just not owned slaves.
In the Law Code of Hammurabi, your debt slaves only served for 3 years, and then they went free in the fourth.
Oh, really?
In the Exodus 21 and Deuteronomy, I think chapter 25 or 15, you serve for 6 years and go free in your seventh. Unless you're a woman, according to Exodus 21:7, if you're a woman and you're sold into slavery, then you're a slave for life.
Incredible. All right, I look forward to getting into all that.
A good one. Yeah, so not next week because we got to cover the rest of 20, but the week after that it'll be a dicey week.
Yeah,
because we'll have to cover slavery pretty thoroughly.
A
lot of people are gonna be upset if we touch on slavery and don't really cover it thoroughly. But we covered a lot of ground. Any last words?
No, I think it was all about the Sabbath. I liked that. Lot to go.
We did talk about the Sabbath.
Well, that's what this all was jumping off from.
You know what though? Of the 10 Commandments, I think the one that people really like the best, Sabbath law. I know a lot of people are like, listen, I need 1 day of rest. I don't care what's happening.
Yeah, it's too bad we didn't get 2 Sabbaths. Something.
Could you imagine?
Like a midweek Sabbath or something.
Like a siesta?
Like Wednesday. Just Tuesday to Wednesday.
Like a hump Sabbath.
A hump Sabbath, yeah. That'd be nice.
What would we call it?
Well, I don't know what the Sabbath actually means, so it would be hard to figure that one out.
It's a derivative of the Hebrew word for 7.
Oh, okay.
It's just the 7th day, the Sabbath, the
Well,
Shabbat.
then Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So Tuesday to Wednesday. So
I guess the first day of the week then would have been Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So Wednesday is the 4th day of the week?
yeah.
I always forget.
I mean, it should be Tuesday at sundown to Wednesday at sundown, right?
I think shalish is 3 in Hebrew. What's the Hebrew word for 4? I know it's on the tip of your tongue, Dan.
Yeah.
I always forget my numbers. Let me see what the Hebrew for 4 is. Oh, yeah. Okay. No, I don't want the letter word. Hebrew. Nope, it's not Dalet. I don't know why you keep saying that. You're wrong, AI. The Dalet is not the word for 4 in Hebrew. That's the 4th letter. That's not how they represented the word 4.
Maybe I should just add chat PTT.
I'm just gonna. We'll do this. We'll type in the word 4 and see where it shows up. There we go. Genesis 2:10. We have the word 4. We'll throw it into our interlinear translation. Go.
Arba.
That's it.
I did it.
It was Arba. Thank you for bringing that up.
Was on the tip of my tongue.
It was right there.
Yeah.
All right. So Arba is also a name of some Bible, but anyways, long and short of it is,
So we could call it the Arbeth.
I like the Arbeth.
Yeah.
So we got the Sabbath and the Arbeth.
Yeah.
I could go for that, actually. If there was a day of the week, if someone said to you, Dan, pick one day of the week that you'll never have to work again, what day would you?
I mean, Wednesday's a really good one, just to break it up.
It's not bad. I feel like for me, I would pick Friday because I'm always ready to go on the weekend early. And Monday I hate, but no matter if you take Monday or not, there's always a Monday.
Right, yeah.
Monday just becomes Tuesday, right? So I think I would take Friday off. Anyways, at that, guys, I think we covered literally everything that could ever been said on the first 11 verses.
That's right.
So far.
We're getting there.
Thanks for hanging with